It is hard to believe an entire decade has passed since that heartbreaking night. 100 innocent lives were lost. Hundreds more lives were changed forever. Throughout the evening, we will be honoring the memories of the victims. We'll also look at how life has dramatically changed in Rhode Island over the last 10 years. Our special coverage of the club fire tragedy 10 years later continues now, live from the site of the Station Nightclub Fire Memorial. Eyewitness News anchor Mike Montecalvo joins us now.
Hi, Susan. Just talking to people, and a flow of people have been coming in all day to remember loved ones lost. They're back to remember their loved ones, but also because they don't want their loved ones to be forgotten. They told me not only is a permanent memorial at the top of their list, they want their family and friends to always remember those lost. And if you look around 10 years ago tonight, it was cold, it was windy, and there was a lot of snow on the ground, so it's similar. But folks were coming to see a band and have a good time 10 years ago. Tonight, they're coming back to remember family and friends. Now, I want to bring in Eyewitness News reporter Sean Daly. Sean covered the fire when it started 10 years ago, and he's been covering stories for the last decade. And I think some people, Sean, are looking for closure at this point.
Yes, Mike, this has been sacred ground here, right here, for 10 years now. And today, talking with the family and friends of the people who perished here and the people who were burned here, I found it deeply moving.
I wrapped a rose around her cross, a red rose. This is for you, Rachel. We still remember you. You're still in our thoughts and prayers. I drive by here every single day, and every time I drive by, I look and I think of it.
I have pain 24/7. I've got all kinds of problems. I come up here, it seems to disappear. All my physical pain disappears.
So my husband take the picture, he put inside the pocket, we never leave him. He's over here all the time, every day. Every time he uses this kind of jacket, he's having my son inside. Today's her birthday. She died on her birthday. She was one of the waitresses. The more time passed, the more I miss my son. By the way,
you say the more time passes, so it's not better, it's worse?
Worse, exactly. I try to be nice.
Time, in other words, as they say, does not heal all wounds.
After I die, maybe I heal, but before then.
Mike, that's the heart of it right there, if you think about it. People living in pain as a result of this fire. I'll have more of my interviews at 6 o'clock. I'll be back, and one man talks about the fire's central lesson.
Talk about people in pain. A lot of the people that were in the fire and family, friends were turning to the clergy for some support throughout this whole tragedy. And we spoke to Father Robert Marciano, who is the chaplain for the Warwick Police and Fire Department. He was one of the first responders on the scene here that night 10 years ago. And he talks about the heroic efforts he witnessed for himself.
It was just ordinary working class people.
A night of fun turned tragic on February 20th, 2003.
It was just, a nightmare beyond description.
When a fire at the Station nightclub killed 100 people and injured more than 200 others.
Just complete shock at what was happening. I couldn't comprehend, to try to take it all in and to try to get these people help.
Father Robert Marciano, pastor of St. Kevin's Church, is also chaplain to the Warwick Police and Fire Departments. He was one of the first responders to the scene.
I could not describe the heroics. I mean, the place was an inferno, and they were rushing into it. I mean, the building was collapsing, and they were inside trying to drag these people out.
The fire left many first responders scarred for life.
We had some fatalities. As far as emotional fatalities from this, firefighters and police officers that just couldn't get back on track after witnessing what they did, and we understood that.
Driving by was almost impossible.
I don't think I drove by the scene for years. If I had to go somewhere in Coventry or West Warwick, I would go around.
Some of the families wanted to know, where was God on this tragic night?
That question happens when bad things happen to good people, and the answer I always give is that he was right there suffering alongside these poor victims.
And for the firefighters and police officers who put their lives on the line.
Afterwards, at all our briefings, I said, you just earned your whole pay for your whole career tonight. because of what they witnessed and the brave acts that they performed and what they will carry with them all their lives.
It's Father Marciano's prayer that families will be able to finally heal, knowing their loved ones are in a better place.
We have hope that certainly God is with us. And for those of us who are Christian, that death is not the end. It was very consoling to families. I kept saying to some of the parents, your son or daughter will always be young.
Father Marciano also told me that he saw firefighters run out of oxygen, drop their tanks on the ground, and then run back into the building to save people. He said he had never seen anything like that in his life. Target 12 investigator Tim White joins us now. And Tim, you actually had an opportunity to sit down with the former head of the Rhode Island State Police, Brendan Doherty, who was a big part of the first responders that night.
Yeah, Mike, I did. And a lot of people may not remember, but Brendan Doherty was not the colonel of the state police at the time. The Colonel, Stephen Perry, was out of town, and that meant Doherty, who was second in command, actually took charge the night of the fire. On February 20th, 2003, then Lieutenant Colonel of the State Police, Brendan Doherty, got a call just before midnight.
He told me there was a bad fire and there's several people dead.
At 2 a.m., the phone rings again. It was catastrophic.
I've seen so many tragedies throughout my career, my 28 years in the state police, but this is one that I'll never forget.
Doherty became a point person in West Warwick for those looking for a loved one.
I mean, young children coming to the scene, wanting to know if their mother or father was there. It was just horrific.
The Crown Plaza was ground zero for families. This is where they came looking for answers.
When it really hit me was when a mother grabbed me and she wouldn't let go of me, and she was showing me a picture of her daughter, asking me if I've seen her daughter.
Answers were few in the hours, even days following the fire. The identification process took a while, but Doherty recalls there was a sense of relief, even from those who lost loved ones, when they finally learned what happened. Days after the fire, Doherty was asked to address family members.
They were so appreciative that I ended up not being able to speak right away because they were clapping so loud.
Must have been emotional.
It was emotional because I just saw that as, at least they know that I'm doing the best I can. And really wasn't able to talk for a minute. I just can't tell you how painful it was to see what these families were going through.
Mike, you have to keep in mind that this entire scene here was, frankly, it was a crime scene, so Doherty had to manage that along with allowing families to come in here and pay their respects. So as you may remember, they erected that large chain link fence, now that iconic image of the time, so family members could put flowers and other tokens of their love.
I know you have another big interview coming up at 6.
We do. I had a chance to sit down with former Governor Don Kachiri. He was in town for Sunday service. You got to remember, he was only 6 weeks on the job. He sat down with us to reflect on that night and Rhode Island after the tragic fire.
All right, Tim White, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
And we're going to be here all evening long, live coverage of the club fire tragedy 10 years later. Coming up on Eyewitness News at 5:30, a closer look at the plans for the permanent memorial, soon to begin construction here at the station fire site. Plus, how the tragedy affected the lives of the hundreds of firefighters who rushed to the scene that fateful night. And throughout our newscast tonight, we'll be honoring each of the 100 victims who lost their lives here in West Warwick. For now, live in West Warwick, I'm Mike Montecalvo, Eyewitness News.
Eyewitness News anchor Mike Montecalvo joins us now from the fire site with more on today's day of remembrance and plans for that memorial.
Hi, Susan. And even though the sun is going down right now, people are still flowing in here to West Warwick, the station nightclub fire site, to not only pay their last respects, but just talking to a family member earlier tonight, he said he wanted to be here just to feel his loved one who passed away a decade ago. And as you mentioned about the permanent memorial, that is on the minds of everyone here tonight. Eyewitness News reporter Susan Campbell was here on Sunday. And Susan, for the past couple of days, there have been ceremonies. Here Sunday, there was a memorial service that took place for the victims and their families. And besides paying their last respects, they finally are happy that something is going to happen with the memorial.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. And fundraising for that permanent memorial has been going on for several years now, and the work to bring it to fruition has been tireless. Victims, family, and friends tell me when construction begins here, it will be an important new chapter. For a decade, 100 crosses have marked the scene of one of the deadliest nightclub fires in U.S. history. Bruce Kane comes here to honor the memory of his fiancée, Tina Ayer, one of the station fire's 100 victims.
I will always love her, and I always think of her every day.
Soon, this property will be transformed into the Station Fire Memorial Park.
It'll be a lot happier, and the souls will go to heaven.
On Sunday, we got our first glimpse of the memorial's final plans, which include an entrance gate stretching nearly 30 feet into the sky, an open-air pavilion, and pathways winding through a dozen memorial gardens, which will have individual monuments for each of the victims.
Visitors may recognize the general shape of these monuments that, like many of the park features, reflect their love of music that was shared by so many of the victims.
For victims, loved ones, and survivors of the fire, this permanent memorial is a long time coming.
I think the biggest thing for me is knowing that it will be secured. Our loved ones are still here in the soil here and in the air, and I think it will be a more pleasant place for people to come.
We've learned a stone angel carving and a book commemorating the victims, which had been previously donated, will also be incorporated into the memorial park. The cost to build and maintain the permanent memorial is estimated to be about $1.5 million. And Mike, we've learned that construction is set to begin here this spring. So it's an important new day to look forward to.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Now we're hearing from some people who are on the front lines tonight. Many, like us, they will never forget the events that took place a decade ago. 10 years later, they're still coping with what they witnessed. Eyewitness News reporter Mara Kennedy recently spoke to the state's fire marshal, who was the Warwick's fire chief at the time. She continues our in-depth coverage from the mobile newsroom.
Hundreds of firefighters rushed to the deadly fire in West Warwick. On the 10th anniversary, we're taking a look on how it greatly impacted their lives. It's a scene of chaos as firefighters rush to the station nightclub on a night they say they'll never forget. Those fighting the blaze and running into the flames, hoping to save lives. Recall that terrible night.
It had a dramatic effect on not only me, but the firefighters that worked for me. We went through a year after that with a lot of counseling, a lot of critical incident stress work. And to some degree, I think it's the reason I'm here. That when I left the fire suppression side of the house, so to speak, I came to this side of the house, and what I saw that night at the station fire drives me every day to make sure it doesn't happen again.
East Providence acting fire chief agrees. It's hard for firefighters to mentally recover from any fatal fire.
People think that we're firefighters and we're supposed to, bear it all. But it's when we go back to the station, we'll rehash this run and we'll talk about it. And one of the good things about, they'll tell you in counseling, is the more you talk about it, the better you can deal with it.
All we can do is work harder every day to make sure that our codes are good, our prevention methods are good, and we prevent those fires from happening.
Coming up on Eyewitness News, we'll take a look at some of those new fire codes that resulted from that deadly fire. Reporting with the mobile newsroom, Mara Kennedy, Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Mara. 10 years later, we still recognize those first responders, especially police and fire, who ran in to save so many people's lives. Eyewitness News analyst Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio is here. The general was the adjutant general of the National Guard 10 years ago. He was also the director of the EMA in Rhode Island, and he was also one of the first responders. In general, when you came to the scene here, you had to be amazed at the police and fire and what they were doing on the scene.
I tell you, Mike, that particular night will never ever leave my mind. And when you look at the kind of heroes that responded, first responders, it was just unbelievable to see the kind of cooperation, the kind of heroism in my mind that we'll never ever forget.
Now, one of your responsibilities as the director of the EMA was to establish some type of mutual support, and it wasn't just for police and fire, but it was also for the local hospitals too.
Absolutely. You know, I was fortunate to have a tremendous executive director, Alice Capitici, who lined that all up to include giving communications throughout the entire fire departments, EMS, and hospitals. And for the next several weeks, Al and his entire staff with EMA were extremely instrumental in helping all of the logistics requirements for all of the fire departments and hospitals for the next several weeks. And then we followed on with establishing a family support center at the Crown Plaza.
And that was just as important because there were so many families, General, just remembering back 10 years ago that they were looking for answers.
They were, and there were no answers to be gotten. All you could do was listen and certainly give them as much comfort as you could. But looking in their faces and their eyes, you can't begin to even appreciate all the kind of despair that was in their eyes. And the only hope they had was to look into themselves and certainly look at Father Marciano as an example that gave them the spiritual help to get through those several weeks and days.
Okay, General Centracchio, thank you very much for your thoughts. And right now, if you go to WPRI.com, remembering those who lost their lives 10 years ago, we have photos of each of the 100 victims of the nightclub fire tragedy. You can also find the photos on our homepage, WPRI.com. It's under continuing coverage. Our coverage of the club fire tragedy 10 years later will continue in just a few minutes. Now we remember some of the lives lost.
We continue our special in-depth coverage of the club fire tragedy 10 years later. Today, Rhode Island is remembering the 100 victims killed in the station nightclub fire. Friends and family members have been gathering at the West Warwick site, now dotted by dozens of crosses to honor their loved ones. A lot of lessons were learned from that horrible night, including how nightclubs now handle crowd control. The city of Providence has required bouncers to be licensed since 1999, but now part of their training includes panic control. Eyewitness News reporter Susan Hogan got exclusive access to one of those training programs, and she joins us with an inside look.
Well, bouncers are usually trained to deal with intoxicated patrons or how to break up fights, but now in Providence, they need to be able to sense panic and react.
We need to address their safety.
Inside this nightclub in Providence, on any given night, you could have a crowd in the hundreds.
A group in the grips of panic will not act with collective interest.
But on this Saturday afternoon, the Coliseum's lights are up, music off, and the tone solemn.
I don't think it's any coincidence that we find 67 fatalities located right at the exit.
Trainer Fraser Olgren is teaching these bouncers an invaluable lesson about sensing panic and, more importantly, how to get people out safely, especially in a situation where every second counts.
When we look at the lessons learned, a staff's ability to manage a crowd that is presented with something challenging like a fire becomes a life and death answer.
Providence nightclub owners say it's critical to train their bouncers because in an emergency, there is absolutely no room for mistakes, ever.
We have to teach them, remember, when an emergency happens, all bets are off. every exit is open, everyone is brought towards there. And the only way you can do this is by having your staff trained. Robert?
After the 4-hour training course is over, bouncers are handed certificates and hopefully handed an invaluable lesson in survival.
I knew quite a few people that were in the station fire, so I take it serious. I take the safety serious.
And as of right now, Providence is the only city in Rhode Island that requires their bouncers to be licensed. I'm Susan Hogan, Eyewitness News.
Eyewitness News anchor Mike Montecalvo is there now live to continue tonight's special coverage.
Hi, Susan. Despite the cold temperatures and nightfall, people are still streaming into the former station nightclub site to pay tribute to those who lost their lives. And the common thread that we're seeing throughout the day and night here is people coming together to be together to remember those who lost their lives. And Eyewitness News reporter Sean Daly has been covering this story really for the last 10 years. Sean was here the night of the fire, and it seems like now they finally have a common goal of at least a permanent memorial is coming.
Yes, and that's more than some relief. From day one, if you think about it, 10 years ago, all the way through to today, this fire has produced one painful moment, Mike, after another.
Every day is difficult. I mean, I remember and love him, miss him every single day. It's just hard to believe that it's been 10 years. Some days it feels like I haven't hugged him in forever, and other days it feels like it was yesterday.
It teaches an awful lesson, but it's a hell of a way to do it.
What's the lesson 10 years later?
To see that it never happens again. People learn by mistakes, and this is one of the biggest ones they made. You don't light fires inside buildings. Simply as that.
Sometimes you've broken something, you have 2 pieces, right? But I think my art is a very tiny piece. So
Shattered.
Shattered, you're right.
It's her birthday. I come around on her birthdays, you know. I hope she's doing okay, wherever she is. Yeah.
She's okay.
It's hard. I miss her so much.
Yep.
It's a hard day.
A hard day, Mike, after a hard 10 years.
Will they ever find closure? Is that what they're looking for?
I'm not sure it is what they're looking for, and I guess the direct answer to your question is no. I didn't get any sense that closure is anywhere in sight.
Investigator Tim White is here, and Tim had a chance to meet up with former Rhode Island Governor Don Carcieri, who was in town on Sunday for the memorial. And this was, even though he was only governor for a short amount of time before this happened to him, this really shook him.
Oh, it absolutely did. I mean, as you said, consider this. The night the fire broke out, he was just on the job for 6 weeks, and as you're about to see, he is still overcome with emotion when reliving this horrible tragedy. The night of the station fire, former Governor Don Carcieri was in Florida.
So I said, well, you got to get me out of here.
The next morning, he arrives in West Warwick.
All of our prayers need to go out to the families.
Words hard to describe the sight and the feeling as you're standing there looking at what's transpiring.
Carcieri says he was overwhelmed at how Rhode Island pulled together in its darkest hour.
With the enormity of this tragedy, they just, wanted to do anything, Just the outpouring.
Clearly, the emotions are still raw 10 years after the fact.
Oh yeah.
You still feel it.
You don't. It's something you never get over, and I always think about the families. As bad as I feel, and as as emotional as I can get talking about it or thinking back, think about the families.
3 nights after the fire, Carcieri says he and his wife Sue learned the identity of one of the victims, Catherine O'Donnell.
I looked and said, "My God!" So I worked with her father years ago,
And when our kids were young, we used to camp together. We were good friends when our kids were young. And we both sat there and just tears.
That really speaks to Rhode Island, doesn't it? We were all in some way touched by this fire.
Oh, yeah, everybody. Yeah. If you didn't have a loved one, you knew somebody that did, you know, and so yeah.
Tears, a real poignant moment from the former governor, and clearly heavy hearts, Mike, even after all this time.
Now, Tim, you caught up with him on Sunday. He did come to this memorial service.
Yeah.
How was he received?
Oh, he was warmly received. As soon as he walked on this site, Mike, victims, family members, and survivors swarmed him, were hugging him. It was like seeing an old friend, you know, acquaintances forged by a terrible tragedy.
Okay, Tim White, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
And as part of our coverage of the club fire tragedy 10 years later, Eyewitness News has reached out to the defendants in the criminal case. Former club owners Jeffrey and Michael Dedarian did not respond to our request, and the attorney for Great White band manager Dan Beakley said his client was not available for an interview. Beakley is now living in Florida. Now, since that tragic night 10 years ago, many positive steps have been taken to make sure there was proper safety in all of the buildings. Susan, I know you spoke with one of the first responders who helped make those changes.
That's right, Mike, I sure did. Rhode Island's fire codes have been completely overhauled in the past 10 years and are now so strict that they're being used as a blueprint for other states and even other countries. The first responders were just some of the heroes on February 20th, 2003. One of those Warwick firefighters rushing in was Peter Janite.
The way that fire accelerated, the speed by which it moved through the station was something I hadn't seen in my 20 years as a firefighter.
To this day, he remembers every victim he came in contact with. And as a former state lawmaker, he has worked on their behalf over the last 10 years fighting for tougher fire codes.
The state has made remarkable improvements.
Here's what those stricter fire codes mean. Rhode Island nightclubs with a capacity over 150 people must have sprinkler systems. Curtains, bar stools, paint, carpeting have to be fire resistant. Clubs are subject to more frequent surprise inspections. Staffers must be trained in crowd management. And the grandfather clause exempting older establishments from the updated code was thrown out.
When we're dealing with human lives, dealing with these types of venues, there should be no exemption.
The new laws have gained international attention. Still, we asked Janite, could the state be any safer?
I feel we are the safest state in the country from my perspective.
These codes can't change what happened, but Janite hopes they will prevent another tragedy. And Peter Janite has been in Washington, D.C., pushing for legislation that would bring $500,000 in tax breaks for businesses that install sprinkler systems. Our special coverage of the club fire tragedy continues on Eyewitness News at 6.
And all night we will be honoring each of the 100 people who lost their lives 10 years ago. We leave you now with more of the tributes to the victims of the club fire tragedy.
Let's go back to Eyewitness News anchor Mike Montecalvo, who's also there live in West Warwick.
Susan, 10 years ago, hundreds of people turned out to this very site to see the 80s rock band Great White perform. Now, their guitarist is among the 100 victims who died 10 years ago tonight. The family he left behind includes a son who wasn't even born yet when the fire took his father away. Eyewitness News reporter Walt Buteau is going to join me now to talk a little bit about A.C. Longley, who he actually had a chance to speak to.
And Ty Longley was said to be very excited about this son that he would never meet. The son was 6 months away from being born the night of the fire. And with the mother's permission, we talked to 9-year-old A.C. Longley about the very grown-up way he honors the father he never met. With his mother aiming the camera, AC Longley jumps into one of his favorite childhood activities. But his mom tells us her little boy is far more mature than her.
It is true. True story.
Heidi Longley held the phone while her 9-year-old Skyped with us from Illinois. About a decade after that night.
Ty for over 2 years.
She was 3 months pregnant when she flew to Rhode Island looking for Ty, hoping he was alive. As a single mother, she made sure her son heard plenty of stories about his rock star father.
How he really wanted to see me and how he really did love me and how he named me.
Ty's son is already playing the drums and decided last year he wanted to do something else to honor his father. So at 8, he organized a charity to collect toys for hospitalized children.
Yes, I do it to help the kids in the hospital and to do this in memory of my father.
His charity is called Beats, as in bringing everyone a tremendous smile. The father he never met knows all about it, according to AC's mother, who tells him this.
Your father is pretty proud of you, and he's looking down on you saying, oh wow, like my son is doing this charity so people could remember me and I'm not forgotten.
A 9-year-old boy, and so far he's collecting drumsticks, iTunes cards, and Legos. He's actually collected some drumsticks from some rock stars, and again, given them to children in hospitals.
Amazing, 9-year-old and already giving back.
More information online, by the way, on that story.
All right, thank you, Walt. Our coverage of the Club Fire tragedy continues 10 years later this weekend. We have a special